Directed and co-written by Tony Jopia, we are talking Creatures from 2021. And this movie is clearly trying to be a version of the Gremlins franchise or something along the lines of that. It probably succeeds more to be similar to, well, the Ghoulies or Critters more than Gremlins, to be honest, but that's the intent, I would wager. It actually takes place at Christmas, although it's not really a Christmas film. There's nothing really to do with Christmas in it. It just happened to take place around that time of year. And the story tells about this group of astrology students who are going on a field trip in a kind of school bus. And whilst en route, they are suddenly stopped by what appears to be a meteor shower. But this actually is a small rocket ship piloted by this cute little kind of Mogwai-style creature. But it's pursued by other creatures who are far less friendly. And now we have this group of students and teacher trying to help this cute little alien defeat and outrun these vicious little other aliens, which are kind of seemingly have the ability to create human zombies by kind of firing these little slugs out of their mouth, which infect humans and turn them into zombies. Now, what will happen? You'll have to watch the movie and find out. So let's discuss. So this movie has an odd tone. I would have said it kind of plays a little bit like a kind of somewhat of a kids film or a family film, but there is actually quite a lot of gore in here. So I suppose it is trying to go for that Gremlins feel like a family horror film, but it does have, I would suggest, a little bit more actual gore in the movie. So if you don't mind younger people, like your kids, watching a horror film which does have maybe not particularly realistic gore, but certainly a lot of it, then, you know, it's maybe a movie I would consider, because it definitely feels more like a kind of kids film in some ways, or at least a family film. But there is a lot of gore in this movie. Surprisingly, this movie does actually have some somewhat kind of gory deaths, from the kind of your standard, you know, throats getting bitten and arms getting chopped off, to heads getting kind of sliced in half and things like this. So yeah, I mean, there's quite a lot of violence in this movie, a reasonable kind of body count, and a variety of ways these kind of humans end up kind of getting killed. I think the zombie effects are actually quite good. We'll come on to the alien effects again, but the zombie effects, I would say, actually look pretty good, and the zombies do look quite vicious and nasty. And we have this kind of cute, like Baby Yoda style good guy creature called Mumpy, or at least that's what they name it, who's clearly aiming to be the sort of the most cutest kind of style of creature you can possibly find. Again, in the way that Gizmo was a cute little kind of protagonist in the Gremlins movie. So those of you who like to coo over little cute animals and things like that, then I expect you'll probably like this kind of character. It does have an element of kind of fun. I have to say, I think the idea of this movie, despite clearly being a somewhat of a derivative of those sort of style of small creature movies that came out in like the 80s, it's still a fun idea that I think has some interesting elements in here. Yeah, there's the idea here is perhaps better than some of the execution, but it is an interesting kind of fun concept, albeit not particularly original, that I think had this been slightly better produced, I think could have been quite an entertaining film in some aspects. It doesn't mean to say it's not hasn't any entertainment value, but I would say it's has some problems, which we'll come on to in just a moment. But there is certainly, I would say, some degree here of entertainment value, and you know, we get a degree of variation here. Like I said, we've got these little kind of gremlin style bad guys, we've got zombies, we've got these slug things that are the kind of the things that go into your body and make you a zombie. So there's a reasonable amount going on here. We've got a few shots of the UFOs kind of approaching Earth and things like that. So, you know, it's certainly an ambitious movie, I would suggest. And as a lot of kind of action kind of sequences kind of peppered throughout, I would say there are some technical elements here that are fairly well done. It's actually relatively kind of well shot. Some of the VFX are a little iffy, which we're going to come on to, but an actual terms of things like camera placement, cinematography, audio mixing, I do think it succeeds in that, but there are elements that it falls down on. So let's talk about those elements, and let's talk about now what doesn't work with this movie. The technical elements are mixed, so I've said what works. What doesn't work here is primarily the VFX. In a number of ways. So we have some quite poor use of green screen. There's a couple of instances where it's so obvious it's green screen, it's actually quite painful. But that's not all. The actual creature effects are a mix of practical puppets and CGI, neither of which look particularly good. I would have preferred the puppets over the CGI, but they both aren't very good. So the puppets, for example, are kind of enemy little bad guys. You can clearly see are made from kind of foam, kind of latex type stuff, because you can see like the little indents in the kind of where the foam is molded and stuff like that. Our little mumpy good guy little creature, again, he just looks like a hand puppet. So the practical side of stuff works not all that well, but it's not as, you know, it's not as bad as the CGI, which looks like early 2000s CGI, very unconvincingly placed on kind of live action background and things like this. It's some of the worst CGI I've seen in a movie that's come out after 2020. I mean, it's actually quite unbelievable how bad some of the CGI is in this film. It's terrible CGI. I mean, some of it looks like it's straight from like a home-bought After Effects edition, and some of it, like the designed creatures and things, they're just really poor. So the VFX aren't good, okay? But, you know, it's a low-budget B-movie. Maybe we can kind of look past the effects. What else maybe isn't is the problem here? I think the other problem that is the big one for me, at least, is the characters that this movie has. So this movie has, I think, maybe like 30-year-olds playing 20-year-olds who act like 12-year-olds. So the cast of characters are quite annoying because they act extraordinarily immature but look way too old. We get really no backstory with them. We don't really feel like we get any type of development in any of the characters, and it kind of leans into sort of stereotypes, like the one Asian girl happens to be like a kind of ninja and things like this. We don't get a huge amount of kind of characterization, and when as the film goes on, you might expect things will pick up, but it doesn't really. We get a couple of sequences where we try to have some conversations. They end up meeting this kind of other group of people, and there's a little bit of dialogue there, which is going to flesh out the backstory, but I don't really feel it particularly works because it's lots of just exposition dumps, and we haven't met the second group of people until about halfway through the film. And then about the second half of the film, I think they lean too much into the zombies, because as poorly done as the VFX are on the aliens, at least they're a little original. But then we have the threat be more about the zombies in the second half, with occasional little appearances from the aliens. And we've seen plenty of zombie films. I mean, I actually think the VFX are better on the zombies, I have to say, because it's just practical makeup on human actors. But it's just a derivative zombie film at that point. That I have to say is a little long as well. I think this movie is about an hour and 3/4. Although that's not an especially long time, I do feel it was kind of like it could have had maybe one or two scenes less in that sort of that second half of the movie to make it a little bit more punchy. You didn't feel you needed like all of these different wave after wave after zombie attacks, because they don't really add anything new, if that makes sense. I would have had a little less and make the actual movie a little bit more punchy. Just maybe like 10 minutes off the runtime, something like that. Not a huge amount, but I think it would have helped, because it does, I think, start to outstay its welcome a little bit. The acting, I have to say, is a little poor. So again, this doesn't help when we have fairly kind of poor characters and that, but yeah, the acting isn't kind of brilliant from some of the cast. I mean, it's not the worst, but it's a little bit on the hammy side. And again, we have these actors almost playing more childlike kind of sort of characters, and you know, lots of kind of insult slinging and things like this that seems quite young, quite juvenile for the age that these sort of characters are kind of looking and presented at, and things like that. So it's unfortunately a fairly poor in execution. Whilst I think the idea here isn't terrible, it's just a little unimaginative, to be fair. But yeah, it's kind of unfortunately let down by poor effects, poor character work, poor acting, and it all goes in to make it somewhat of a below average film, in my opinion. But not terrible, below average. I'll give it a 4 out of 10. Have you seen it? What did you think of it? Please do let me know, and I'll look forward to seeing you next time.